All right, let's dive into one of those cases that just stays with you, the JonBenét Ramsey case.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those cases that it's tragic, and the mystery just grabs you.
1996.
Yeah.
Christmas time in Boulder, Colorado. Picture this perfect family, and then their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, is found dead in their basement.
Yeah.
It's a story that has everything. It's horrifying. There's this family under suspicion, and the mystery is still going strong, even all these years later.
It really is. And it seems like there's just more and more information coming out all the time.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to try to do today, try to sort through it all. We've got a ton of news articles, investigative reports. We even have some recent interviews with John Ramsey himself. So our mission here is to see if we can piece things together, see what we actually know for sure, what are the main theories that people are still talking about, and how that whole search for justice has played out over time.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, when they think of this case, they think of the Ramseys. And that's definitely a big part of it, but there's so much more to this story.
Yeah, definitely. So let's start back at the beginning. December 26th, 1996. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, she calls 911. She says her daughter's missing, and there's this ransom note. They're asking for $118,000.
And right off the bat, there are some things that are they're weird. They don't quite add up.
Oh, yeah.
That ransom note, it's not your typical note. I mean, it's long, really long, and it's got all this strangely specific stuff in it.
Like what kind of stuff?
Well, like the amount they asked for, $118,000. Turns out that was the exact same amount as John Ramsey's bonus from work. What do you make of that? I mean, is that just a coincidence, or there's something more going on there?
That is really strange. You don't usually see something like that in a ransom note. Yeah. It's almost like they wanted to send a message.
It really does feel like that. And then, to make matters worse, they let friends and family into the house before the investigators got there, before they could really secure the crime scene.
Oh, wow.
From an investigation standpoint, that's a huge problem.
Yeah, I bet.
Think about it. I mean, potential evidence could have been moved, contaminated, all sorts of things. It really makes it hard to figure out what actually happened.
It's like a puzzle where some of the pieces are already missing.
Exactly.
And then hours later, they finally find JonBenét's body.
Right. And not in her bedroom, where you might expect.
Where was she?
Hidden in the basement.
Oh, gosh.
And the way she was found, it's chilling. Wrapped in a blanket, her wrists were bound, and the cause of death, strangulation. With a garrote, they made it out of a paintbrush handle.
Oh, my gosh.
It wasn't a quick or easy death. And on top of that, the autopsy showed a skull fracture, too. So, I mean, this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was brutal.
It's just awful. And it's understandable why, after all of that, suspicion immediately fell on the Ramsey family.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a child found dead in their own home, a weird ransom note, and then the crime scene's potentially been compromised.
Yeah, that's not a good look.
And the media, oh man, they just went crazy. Every little detail about the family's life was splashed all over the news. Everyone was talking about it, debating it. And when they hired lawyers early on, which is pretty normal in these situations, people saw that as them trying to hide something.
It's almost like they couldn't win no matter what they did.
It really does seem that way. But even with all the focus on them, the handwriting analysis on that ransom note, inconclusive. They couldn't say for sure that Patsy Ramsey wrote it.
So could it have been someone else entirely?
That's the question, and that's where the grand jury comes in. This is a group of regular citizens who look at the evidence and decide if there's enough to officially charge someone with a crime.
Like a mini trial, almost.
Kind of, yeah. And they spent months on this case. They heard testimony, looked at every piece of evidence, but in the end, they didn't indict the Ramseys.
So they weren't charged?
No. But here's the thing. They did consider charges of child abuse resulting in death.
Oh, wow.
So that tells you they weren't completely convinced the family was innocent either.
It's like they were caught in this limbo, right? Not charged, but not entirely cleared either.
Yeah, exactly. And the case just kept hanging over them. The media wouldn't let it go. Public opinion was divided. It must have been incredibly tough for them.
It's like a weight that never really goes away.
And then in 2008, there was a major development. DNA evidence popped up and it exonerated the Ramseys.
Wait, so someone else was involved?
It pointed to an unknown male. And it wasn't just any DNA. This was found on JonBenét's clothing, which means someone else was there at the crime scene.
So if it wasn't the Ramseys, then who was this guy?
That's the big question. And it leads us to a whole other theory, the intruder theory.
That someone broke in.
Exactly. Was there someone else in the house that night? How did they get in? And why would they target JonBenét?
And why hasn't that DNA been matched to anyone? after all these years. It's mind-boggling.
Well, some people think that because the crime scene was messed up in the beginning, some crucial evidence might have been missed.
Oh, right from when they let people in before the police.
Yeah. Footprints, fibers, fingerprints, all that stuff could have been lost or contaminated. It's frustrating, isn't it? The answer might be right there, but we just can't get to it because of what happened that night.
It really makes you think, what if they had done things differently? Would we know more now? But let's shift gears for a second and talk about Jon Ramsey. He's in his 80s now, and he's really been pushing to solve his daughter's murder. What do you think's driving him after all this time?
I think it's just he needs answers, He's been very critical of the Boulder Police Department, especially because they haven't wanted to use the latest DNA technology on some key evidence, like the garrote they used to strangle JonBenét.
He's not giving up.
No, not at all. He's convinced this case can be solved, that the technology's there to finally find the killer. He even said, quote, "It will be solved."
There's a new Netflix docuseries that looks at all of this, It goes into the mistakes that were made early on in the investigation and follows Jon Ramsey's fight for answers. It's a good reminder that even after all this time, the search for the truth hasn't stopped.
It hasn't, and it's a story that I think will continue to fascinate people for a long time. It's got all the elements of a great mystery, but at its heart, it's a human tragedy.
Exactly. So before we move on, I want to hear what you think so far. What really stands out to you about this case? What are your initial thoughts?
So many twists and turns, huh? You've got the shock of it all, and everyone's zeroing in on the family, and bam, that DNA evidence just flips everything on its head.
Right. And it gets you thinking about all those other cold cases out there, the ones where maybe the tech just wasn't good enough back then. Like, could there be answers just waiting to be found, just like with JonBenét?
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? And it really shows how much forensic science has come along, partly because of cases like this one pushing things forward.
But we can't forget about the people involved, Imagine what the Ramseys went through. Being suspects in their own daughter's murder, having everyone looking at them like that for years.
It's hard to even fathom, isn't it? And even after that DNA evidence cleared them, can you really ever escape that kind of attention? It's like people already made up their minds.
Yeah, like public opinion just takes over sometimes.
It does. And it makes you think about how important that idea of innocent until proven guilty really is, right? Because the damage can be done even if someone's cleared later on.
It's a good point. But zooming out a bit, what do you think this whole JonBenét case tells us about the justice system in general? I mean, what can we learn from it?
It's a reminder that even here, with all our laws and procedures, things can still go wrong. Evidence gets messed up, investigations have flaws, and innocent people can get caught in the middle of it all.
It shows that we can't just assume everything's perfect, that we always get it right.
Exactly. We need to be careful, make sure our methods are solid, and always be ready to adapt as we learn new things and tech gets better. JonBenét's case is a warning sign, but it's also pushed us to make changes for the better.
So even though we still don't have all the answers for JonBenét, it's like her case has made a difference in how we handle these investigations now.
Yeah, it's become the symbol of a family's loss that never goes away, but also of a system trying to learn from its mistakes. But we can't ignore the media's role in all this. I mean, the JonBenét case exploded in the media from day one. How do you think all that attention, all that constant coverage affected the investigation and how the public saw it?
It's like it's impossible to separate what really happened from what people were saying. There was news coverage all day long, everyone's speculating, and then all the documentaries and TV shows trying to figure it out. It's almost like the case turned into entertainment, which feels wrong when you remember what really happened to that little girl.
And all that hype can have real consequences. It can change what witnesses say, put pressure on the investigators, and even sway what the public believes, making it that much harder to see the truth.
And think about how the Ramseys were portrayed in the media. Those images, those headlines, they stick with people, even when new evidence comes out that tells a different story.
It's a good reminder that we can't just believe everything we see and hear, especially in cases like this with so much speculation and drama. We have to think critically.
Definitely. So speaking of finding the truth, Jon Ramsey's really focused on getting advanced DNA testing done on some of the key evidence. He thinks that's the key to finally figuring out who did it.
He's putting his hopes on science, that's for sure. But it's not as simple as just running a test, is it? There are other things to consider, ethical stuff.
Like what?
Well, there's privacy concerns, the chance of getting false positives, and even the impact of reopening the investigation on everyone involved. It's not just about getting an answer, it's about doing it the right way. ethically.
It's a tough spot to be in. But this is something we're seeing more and more as DNA technology keeps getting better. We can uncover secrets now that we couldn't before, but we have to be responsible with that power.
Exactly. Finding justice is important, but so is protecting people's rights. And even with the best technology, there are still things we might never know for sure.
It's a good point. What do you think about all this? Do you think going ahead with advanced DNA testing is the right move here? And if so, how can we make sure it's done in a way that respects everyone involved?
It's a tough call, and I don't think there's a clear answer. On one hand, you have the chance to finally solve this case, to give JonBenét's family some peace after all these years. But then you also risk bringing back all that pain, digging up those memories, and maybe even finding things out that some people would rather not know. It's a lot to weigh. What do you think? Is finding justice worth all that potential cost? Or are some things better left alone?
That's a really heavy question, and I honestly don't know. It's like you're trying to find a balance between finding the truth and protecting people from more pain. It makes you think about what JonBenét herself would want if she were here. Would she want them to keep searching, even if it meant bringing up all these difficult things? Or would she rather they let it be and focus on the memories of her life? Yeah, it's a real ethical dilemma, isn't it? Trying to weigh the potential for closure against the risk of causing even more pain. And with JonBenét's case, you've got that media frenzy to factor in too.
Oh, absolutely. That just adds a whole other layer of complexity. It's like anything new that comes up, any possible lead, it's going to be all over the news.
It's hard to even imagine being in that position, right? To suddenly be at the center of this huge case because your DNA popped up somewhere. Even if you were innocent, just the suspicion alone could be devastating.
Absolutely. It underscores how important it is to proceed cautiously and be sensitive to everyone involved. If they do decide to go ahead with advanced DNA testing, they have to be prepared for the possibility that the results might not be clear-cut. You could have degraded samples, partial matches, or even DNA from someone who was in the house at some point but had nothing to do with the crime itself.
It's a reminder that even with all the advancements in technology, there's still a level of uncertainty that we have to acknowledge. It's not like in the movies where DNA evidence magically solves everything.
Exactly. And sometimes, in cases like this, the focus shifts from finding a perfect solution to getting as close to the truth as we can, while recognizing that there are limits to what we can know for sure.
It makes you wonder what JonBenét would think about all of this if she were here today. Would she want them to keep digging into this, even if it meant bringing back all those painful memories and potentially causing more harm? Or would she prefer to let the past stay in the past and focus on the memories of her life?
That's a question we can't answer, of course, but it's worth considering. At the end of the day, any decision about what to do next needs to respect JonBenét's memory and recognize the impact this case has had on everyone involved.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the JonBenét Ramsey case, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
I think the main takeaway is that this case is more than just a true crime story. It reflects our fascination with mysteries, our ongoing struggles with complex legal and ethical issues, and the human stories that are at the heart of every investigation.
It reminds us that even with advanced technology and forensic techniques, some questions might never be answered. But the desire to find the truth, to understand what happened to this little girl, that's what keeps driving us, makes us question, makes us think.
Absolutely. And even if we never have all the answers, JonBenét's case has left a permanent mark on our culture. It started important conversations about justice, ethics, and the way the media shapes how we see the world. It's a story that will keep fascinating and challenging us for years to come.
And that's what's great about doing a deep dive like this. It's not just about learning facts. It's about sparking curiosity, making you think, and encouraging you to explore these complex issues long after the episode is over.
Exactly. So if you're interested in learning more about this case, definitely check out that Netflix docuseries we mentioned earlier. It's a really thorough look at the investigation, explores different theories, and features interviews with key people involved. It's a thought-provoking watch that might leave you with even more questions than answers, but that's how it is with a truly captivating mystery.
And as always, we encourage you to do your own research, form your own opinions, and have thoughtful discussions about what we've talked about today. The JonBenét Ramsey case shows us that truth can be hard to find, but searching for it can be a powerful and eye-opening journey.
Well said. We'll leave you with this final thought. What do you think happened to JonBenét Ramsey? Which theory makes the most sense to you? And what would justice look like in a case this complicated and tragic? Keep those questions in mind as you continue to learn about this enduring mystery. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.